how do you disrupt creativity without breaking what people already love?
You cannot really throw decades of trust and recognition that you have with a heritage brand, but at the same time, you can't remain static either.
Was there a moment in this campaign that you thought, this might not work, or my pricing is out? And what were the early signals that told you it actually was?
More often than not, as smart marketers, we're usually looking at shares, kind of like tell us if we're in the right track or not. But by the time you kind of have that, it's a little bit too late. It's just describing what has happened. If you're chasing just after virality, number of clicks, and just basic views without understanding if they fully got the message, etc., you're just funding someone's 5 seconds of fame, and it's really not going to move the needle if there's no clear business linkage or business outcome that comes with it.
When you want to be a senior leader like yourself, it's about that commercial mindset. You can't be just looking at everything in marketing. It needs to be outside of marketing. Yeah. Hello and welcome to the CMO Office. My name is Nikki Taylor. I am the APAC Marketing and Communications Director for Analytic Partners and your host today. And today I'm joined by the beautiful and wonderful Mariel Chavez, a standout leader at P&G, and we're going to talk about soap powder, basically where advertising began back with the soap opera and those 1950 soap ads. And we're going to bring that forward into the 21st century. I'm excited. Let's go. So we're going to start with Tide. So Tide, you achieved a 3-peat growth. That means 3 years of consecutive growth. So what I want to know is what specific consumer insights shaped that evolution, and how did you validate they were truly the growth drivers?
Oh, it didn't come easy. The big unlock actually came when we reframed the consumer problem, because it wasn't just about clean clothes. People wanted confidence in their daily lives. And so we had to do a lot of consumer insighting work, a lot of in-home visits to truly understand what is happening with the consumers, because the growth was quite volatile at the start. Sometimes we'd gain some share and lose it the next month. So it wasn't quite sustainable. And then we realized that for a lot of the consumers, detergents are just good enough. A lot of the detergents that they use are just good enough. And for the premium ones, while they know it's good and maybe a little bit more pricey for a reason, they reserve that for very unique moments, for very tough stains, which meant they don't use it every day, which is obviously bad for the brand. So through a lot of consumer insighting and in product prototyping as well, in market prototyping, I mean, we tried to understand what benefits would actually change the behavior. And I'm oversimplifying it, but ultimately it's the superior clean, like a level of clean that can really, in a way, say complete clean or perfect clean. That's the level of clean that they're looking for. And kind of that really became the anchor in terms of how we created the campaign and changed the product, the packaging, etc.
Amazing. Yeah, because I'm going to say with my washing powder, I mean, I just pick whatever, right?
Yeah.
And it's normally on price. So that's super interesting that you really did dive into those consumer insights and did home visits as well?
In-home visits, yeah. Like always going to like consumer homes and kind of talking, not just talking to them, sometimes even just watching them wash like their clothes and kind of just behave in their house and see how they actually move. And sometimes the insight isn't exactly in what they say.
Yep.
But in the little observations in terms of how they use the product and how they move inside the house.
Yeah, I think as marketers, we forget that side of things so much. We want to sit in our desk and just look at numbers, look at dashboards and everything like that. But actually, it's what's not said.
Yes.
Is actually the uncovered truth, which unlocks what that core insight is. And, you know, obviously that's why you got the 3 years consecutive growth, because when you really do unlock what is meaning to them, why they would buy it, especially for something that is everyday use, not top of my mind, not that I'm really going to switch out. That's why, you know, it can work. Just building on that. So obviously you started to reposition that legacy brand of Tide, but how do you disrupt creativity without breaking what people already love? Because you already have a base, right? So you don't want to get rid of that, but you're trying to grow it and have extra growth and volume on top of that. So how do you balance that out?
I think for heritage brands, it's an evolution, not so much a big revolution, because you cannot really throw decades of trust and recognition that you have with a heritage brand, but at the same time, you can't remain static either. So there is just that fine balance of how do you stay true to the core equities that you have as a brand, but reinventing the storytelling that you're doing, something that is a little bit more resonant to the market, resonant to the culture, and what the consumer is actually facing now versus, let's say, 60 years ago. Because just taking this as an example, Tide in the Philippines that has been in the country for like 60 years. So the needs might have changed, the behaviors might have changed, the consumer behavior could have matured. And so there's a different way of telling that story. And I think as long as you stay true to the benefit and the core equity you want to communicate, there are very different ways for you to not completely rewrite it, but just refresh the storytelling.
I don't know. I can see the passion coming through you from the storytelling, and I'm just thinking, if that was my job of storytelling, washing powder, how excited I would be. But clearly, like you said, you've got the passion for the marketing and the storytelling, and it's coming through. So, looking at the campaign planning, how do you weigh out that short-term sales against the need to long-term brand build that equity? Because obviously, like you said, it's not going anywhere. It's been around for 60 years. You've got to have growth. That's one of the short-term goals, and they're looking for that. But ultimately, who wins that debate inside P&G? How do you get that done?
Well, I mean, not just in any company. I think these things should not, I believe it shouldn't be at odds. I think the best campaigns are the ones that deliver today's sales, but also set the stage for tomorrow's growth. And, a lot of that is really kind of really understanding, understanding the immediate ROI metrics that you need to hit, but also staying true to the equity building blocks that you need to do. For me, it's a simple framework. Like everything we do and every activation, every building block should be contributing to the long lasting assets that you want to preserve for the brand. So product superiority, brand equities you want to own, and obviously the consumer memory activations that you want, or the system that you want, like awareness, like consideration, all of these things. It should contribute to that. And having that, there needs to be like a discipline of always asking, okay, if I do this tactic, what is the lasting equity that it would leave? And having that discipline allows you to just make sure you're not chasing after quick wins.
But what sort of ratio do you do? Because I'm looking at it, right? So I've got Tide.
Yeah.
And let's just take the Philippines for an example, right? So we're talking about brand equity building and distinctive assets and things like that versus promotion that is going to be in store to drive the short-term growth, or even just the messaging of the key new product development that you've done. How do you balance that out? And what sort of ratio did you put?
I think at the end of the day, it needs to be aligned to the strategy that you have. So let me just make it a little bit more concrete. We were restaging the brand at that point it is a premium brand, and we were restaging it into to really owning that space, superior cleaning. That meant there was some pricing. That meant there was a change in like the communication into like the perfect clean claim. That also meant like we needed to put that in people's baskets. We need to put that. So in terms of promotion, there needs to be a level of promotion where they don't only just see that the brand is being restaged, that they consider the brand and put it in their basket. So it's a fine balance across all, and really understanding the different building blocks that move the needle for the market. So it depends on each market, but let's say for a market like the Philippines, promotion is definitely something that will help them try it, right? Like at the end of the day, it's a sachet market. So the price outlay or the cash outlay for each sachet that they buy, it matters. So that was definitely important when we launch something. There needs to be it'd be good to have an intro price, or it'd be good to have a good bundle pack that comes with it. So I think being able to be in touch with metrics, like immediate metrics that you see, and also the more classic metrics like share and sales and penetration, that helps you guide month on month how you need to pivot across all of these buckets.
Yeah, I think that's great. It's, definitely for your category, right? It is a try sample to move and shift perspective and want to get into the basket. That's so important. I guess, was there a moment in this campaign, because obviously you were reshifting the brand positioning. So not campaign, but reshifting their positioning that you thought this might not work or my pricing is out? And what were the early signals that told you it actually was?
Absolutely. Whenever you restage something like a heritage brand or something really big, there will always be a risk of you alienating your current set of consumers. But there were a couple of green shoots that told us we were in the right direction at that point. One was through social listening, we realized that the consumers are actually, in an unprompted manner, were repeating the key message that we were trying to say.
Love
so that is like a good one, right?
Yeah.
And almost like an immediate check that you do. Months after, well, like not soon after the launch, we also realized that there is support from the trade, and there's a momentum in the trade because retailers were being more open in terms of investing more sales fundamentals in store, whether it's shelving and or display. So that's also a good indication that there is that support from the trade partners.
Yeah, I think that's great. You've touched on a few things, like when you're repositioning, the trade-offs that you need to make. Like you said, you've got to look at price promotion to get it into the basket, and then off the back of that, what are you looking for in social listening to see if it's resonating, the messaging is hitting. So I think that's super key, like when you're actually repositioning, that you've got those metrics in place to sort of validate as you go along and pivot if you need. So now if we look across Tide and Downy, what were the primary KPIs you sort of tracked? And were there metrics that proved more predictive than others? So you've touched on some of them. Like we've talked about, you're looking at social listening, you're looking at, how many people take a sample pack, then how many people are sort of buying on the discount price. What are some of the other metrics that you're tracking? Because this category itself is quite different to some of the other ones in marketing.
Definitely the classic ones. Classic commercial KPIs, you have to track that. Sales, shares, penetration. But for me, the most predictive would be leading indicators of consumer behavior.
Okay.
So that's like ad recall and how they, if they kind of link it back to the brand or brand linkage. That is a good way to forecast if the trial will translate to sustainable growth. Because if they understand what you are, the benefit that you're trying to give and connect it to your brand, chances are the lift will stick. So I think those to me are quite important, not just the...
those are the ones you've got your eye on the most.
Because it comes quite quickly too.
Yeah.
Right? Especially in Asia Pacific where... TV is still in many ways still king in terms of reaching as many eyeballs and awareness. So it's quite apparent as very early on if the message is landing, and it's apparent quite early on if it's being attributed to your brand.
So you're looking, okay, I've launched, I've got a flight in TV, I might have some out of home. Am I seeing my commercial side with the sales and the, that sort of going up, driving up pretty quickly straight away?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Great. How do you build and optimize frameworks so that measurement insights actually influence the in-flight decisions rather than becoming post-cam reports? A lot of people talk about that, right? You know, as marketers, we have so much data, so many dashboards, right? But how do we make sure that we have the right data at the right time? It doesn't have to be real time, but when we need it, we have the correct insight. And there's different things for different reasons. So for example, when we're launching, those are some early leading indications. That's great. It's a little bit more real time. But then, when we're looking at making commercial decisions going forward, a lot of the times we want to look back 3-5 years and aggregate and look at, bring in other things like the economy and stuff like that to understand what's happening with the base. So when you think about data and optimizing your framework, what are the steps that you go through? And maybe you can explain to our audience what you think is valuable, how you make sure that you have the data at the right time rather than post-campaign or, it's just a dashboard and it doesn't help you.
I mean, there's different ways to it, but my bias is to always have what I would like to call like an always on learning loop, which means especially for major launches, you typically have maybe a bi-monthly or a monthly tracker or dashboard so that you understand your media signals better and your brand health metrics better. I think that's really, really important because it allows you to have real-time decision making leeway versus like waiting for the share report like a month later, and by that point it's a little too late. So just having that always on learning loop for me is very important, because you can pivot very quickly. Just to give an example, let's say you have copy on air, and for some reason the ad recall is there's a gap between ad recall and the conversion. When that happens, you have the green light to at least change the targeting, change the creative mid-flight, and swap the copy or kind of change the asset that you're airing. So that is very important, because then you'd really kind of nip it in the bud should it be not in the direction that you want it to go.
Okay. And then long term, I'm interested, do you think about, because when I think about washing powder, some of the things that might change, like if we take ice cream, if it's hot, I might sell more ice cream. If it's cold, maybe a little bit less. And I know the stores that stock your items will move it around based on that, right? So if we think about washing powder, I'm thinking when it's sporting season or rainy season, like, do you see an uptick? Are you putting that into modeling to sort of like to be able to understand that? I'm also thinking like there's some festivals like the Color Festival, right? Like you're definitely going to get your clothes done, or maybe wedding season and stuff like that. Is that something that you're aggregating across years to really understand what's happening in your category with things that are outside of marketing to help you determine, sort of peaks and troughs in your year?
For sure. I mean, we call it like seasonal impact, and there definitely is that. Maybe a good example would be like, let's say for dish care business, for example, or home care business. Christmas period would be like a big like key consumption period, because there's a lot of home celebrations, a lot of dishes to wash. So we take that into account, because there's
I wouldn't have thought of that, but yes.
There is an impact to that, right? Like in terms of the consumption that you typically see for that quarter, for example. And it's important to note of these things, not just from a marketing perspective in terms of like putting an asset that kind of resonates during that period, of course, sure. But at the same time, in making sure that the way you look at data is a little bit more nuanced, because you might think, oh, there's an uptick. But in reality, at some point, it would correct, let's say a quarter later, because the key consumption period has gone. So it's just good to like, from a creative lens, take note of these things so that you can put out something that is relevant, that is resonant at that specific period, or should you want to ride on a certain event or a certain kind of season. But at the same time, it also is good to note this so that you can look at the data in a more meaningful manner and with a little bit more context.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's what we sort of call like you're looking at from the commercial mindset. And it's what I talk to a lot of marketers around. Like when you want to be a senior leader, like yourself, it's about that commercial mindset. You can't be just looking at everything in marketing. It needs to be outside of marketing, because whether you put that campaign or not, during Christmas, sales would go up, right? So how much is attributed to your campaign versus that's naturally, a peak for you. So I think that's really great. Could you share with me an example where a measurement-led pivot significantly improved one of your campaign's performance?
Okay. There's a lot. So maybe the first one, there's a lot, because it's not like you always hit it out of the ballpark all the time. It might look like that, but there's a lot of testing involved. There's a lot of pre-testing. Maybe top of mind would be, I remember there was this ad for Downy, which had a good recall, but almost like a good immediate like recall, but the conversion was lagging. And when we looked at the data, I think there's a lot of appreciation for the emotional storytelling part that was happening, but the consumers were not linking it back to the prototypical benefit of like long-lasting freshness. So there was that gap. So because of data and because of like looking at the metrics, there was a quick pivot of just doing a quick re-edit and a recut of the whole thing, where the benefit was unmissable and unmistakable in that cut. And just little pivots, right? Like in the way the trail of the flowers is going and the amount of sparkles. It sounds a little too meticulous, but to be honest, these things do matter. And we did see a change in terms of the conversion and obviously the sales and the engagement after after that switch, because we do invest a lot on, let's say, TV, right? So
The CMO Office is brought to you by Analytic Partners, the global leader in commercial analytics, which turns data into expertise to help marketers make the impact in the C-suite we need. What kind of impact? Every dollar spent on Analytic Partners last year, we return $70 in incremental revenue. To find out more, go to analyticpartners.com. And I'm just going to ask, because I know a lot of people sitting out there are like, well, you know, P&G, you've got the resources, you've got the budget, so of course you can tweak and pivot and everything like that. What would your advice be to the marketers that, you know, are in maybe finance or banking or even some of the other traditional ones where they may not have the budget or the resources? Like, how much, you know, how hard do you think it is for them to continue to iterate and make sure that they can pivot?
Well, maybe a good indicator of the, like a good example would be what happened in the pandemic. A lot of like really small brands actually grew in the pandemic beyond, like whether it's a beauty brand, whether it's like a food brand. There's, especially in the world where digital is starting to get more and more prevalent, even in like tier 2, 3 countries, right? Like I think it's social listening and kind of understanding where the, even as simple as like search spikes or social sentiment, that one is it's very quick to understand where the market is moving or where the consumer's heads and hearts are, at least for that week, because it could change next week, right? If the pandemic is any indication, like consumer sentiment can change like literally overnight. So I think even that alone, and I'm sure there's easy tools or maybe even like very agile agencies that could help with kind of just understanding that even without like a lot of money to create like a big TV ad, for example, there's a lot of ways to be able to capture that sentiment for the moment with something very creative, especially online.
Yeah, I like that. And I like this. It's a few times now you've come back to social listening. So clearly that's a core tenet of what you do when you're planning and keeping a pulse on things. And I think it's interesting because, you know, again, I come back to it's washing powder, right? I wouldn't expect people to have a lot to say other than it got my stain out or it didn't get my stain out type thing. Like I'm surprised that there's a lot going on that you could pivot and try and draw out these core insights. So, you know, maybe you can shed light on what do you read? What do people say about these things that make it interesting that you go like, never thought of that. And that's why we pivoted this way.
A lot of it's a mix. It's not so much just reviews. Obviously, sometimes you do get actual reviews from like e-commerce sites or maybe some consumer might even call in and field in a comment, a feedback, a complaint or whatnot. But that's besides the point. Like sometimes it's just simple as what's happening in the market. Is there a specific trend that's happening in the market? Is there a very nuanced like joke that you think from an equity standpoint you can write on and it fits? Of course, it needs to fit the tonality of the brand. It needs to fit the kind of the persona of the brand and the character of your brand. Not everything that's trending you need to write on, but very easily there's many ways for you to kind of interact with a social conversation that's currently happening. Obviously, there's obvious things that you would want to avoid, like the more political side of things, and etc. But people these days have a lot, like every week there's something new that people are talking about or there's something that's trending. Understand if it's a conversation that your brand can easily get into, especially with emerging platforms. I say emerging platforms, but really these platforms are far emerged already, like, you know, let's say like the social media sites like TikTok, etc. So there's different ways. You don't need to wait a full quarter when you're creating a new ad or maybe a full year before you get into the conversation or change the benefit that you're trying to say. A good example would be, again, I'm going back to the pandemic because that was really, I would say, a challenging period for a lot of brands. And I remember at that point, Downy was deemed non-essential because it's a fabric softener, right? Like you'd need toothpaste, you'd need shampoo, you need a lot of these things, but you know, you probably don't need a fabric softener. So the consumer sentiment kind of changed overnight. You'd think, right? Especially because the basket size is smaller, cash outlays, so it's challenged. But so that was a challenge. So how do you pivot the benefit in a very different manner? And that's so what we did was like trying to understand and try how we can position long lasting freshness to be relevant at home, because they're just at home, right?
Yeah.
Usually you want long lasting freshness when you're outside. You want people to like kind of smell that your like outside clothes are has a good scent throughout the day, but you don't necessarily need that at home. So there was a quick pivot in terms of understanding how can that still be relevant at home? What are the cultural behaviors where people would probably not want to smell like their clothes to smell at home when they're cooking at home all day or spending.
Fair enough. There was a lot of cooking in the pandemic.
Yes. And there's also the protection aspect, because at the end of the day, it's still something that cleans and protects.
Yeah.
So how do you communicate that? Because there's a lot of need for that during that time, even if you're just at home, because obviously the virus can still happen anytime.
It just got anywhere, didn't
Yes.
it? But I think that's a good point that you made. It's about the conversations that you can
Yes.
start. And I think that's one of the things that we forget as marketers to take a little bit more closer look at. Like, we have our core messages, it needs to align with it, but we should be able to pivot our communications based on what the conversation is happening. I think it lends itself into also, like what you said, storytelling. So, like when you're talking about that, in my mind, when I was thinking about socials, now I have pictures of people doing hacks of how to get stains out or why it's so soft and everything like that, which I never would have thought of until we had this conversation. But it brings me back to when I was at UPS managing the brand, and, we would never talk about the delivery service. We would always talk about how we help the small customer, the SMB owner do what they need to do so that they could actually grow their business, rather than, we deliver a package. It was always like, no, actually, because we managed to get it there faster, they were able to deliver it. They had a happy person, they came back again, or whatever it was, right?
It's just a funny side story, because you mentioned UPS. I actually follow one page, like I think it's an official page of UPS where they kind of
Is it the dogs?
Yes.
I knew it would be the dogs, and I knew you were going to say that. I know we laugh at it.
It's fantastic. I mean, even I follow it because
I did put the UPS uniform on my dog, and so did some of my other team.
I thought that's brilliant.
It's hilarious because, again, it's just having fun with it, but they are delivery. And it is a bit iconic, and we come back to distinctive assets and stuff in marketing, and it's iconic, the brown uniform, right? Yeah. Delivering the package. So, yes, I know exactly what you're looking at.
And there's always that interaction. It's actually not forced. Everyone knows when the mailman comes and the dog is there, they would have a little interaction. So
yeah, and it was a little bit of fun in the pandemic. Everyone was like, "There's a package! Oh my God, there's a package!" And then obviously we doubled down on like the dogs doing the Halloween and all that sort of stuff of delivering things. Yeah, it's very cute. Keep watching it. It's great. I still do. Awesome. Well, I'm going to change things up a little bit now, and I want to talk about, you mentioned Downy. So Downy Bye Bahayrus, that was a great campaign. Yeah. You did super, super well in that. But how did measurement help you adjust that tone, the messaging, or media investment during the volatile period? Like you said, you touched on having to shift, and the conversation overnight changed.
Yes.
So what was sort of the data that you were looking at along with so obviously one was the conversations.
Yes.
But what else was saying, okay, what are we shifting? What are we doing? What did you pull back? What did you dial up?
One of the things that also happened is that we thought of like, okay, what else can we do so we provide more value for the consumers while they are at home? And even if it was quite tricky to launch something new during that period, we did launch it like kind of a strategic limited launch of like certain spray, like Downy sprays, right? Or so that you can spray other items at home that you can not really wash. So like your couches or,
so we like the scent and the smell
and
missed walking into hotels or offices.
And also like giving it not just the freshness, but also like the protection, etc. So it's like, that's a good example of just being anchored on what the consumer needs, and then trying to give them what they need during that period, because everyone would probably say, okay, at that period, probably scale back on everything, scale back on TV, scale back on all the investments.
A lot of people did.
And to be honest, the brands that did that a bit more prudently, like they didn't just completely cut back, were the brands that actually reaped the rewards after, because you didn't completely erode the equity that you have as a brand, and you were still top of mind in terms of the consumer. So it also leads to your question on budgeting media, etc. Right? That's a little bit more dynamic, meaning you kind of listen to what's happening in the market. And when the restrictions were really high, obviously you need to shift a little bit to digital. And when there was a little bit more mobility and a little bit more foot traffic, then you reallocate back to in-store. So it's just that agility and fine balance of being able to move things along according to where the market is moving.
Yeah, your point about, not going dark.
Yeah.
And reaping the rewards. We see that in our data as well. Like if you do actually, people do turn off, it takes twice as long to actually come back to just where you were. And you, like you said before, there was lots of small brands that came in and actually seized opportunities during the pandemic. And so a lot of, brands during the pandemic that switched everything off had all these new competitors come in. And it was so much harder and cost them twice as much to even just get back to where they were before. So, I mean, that's always a point that we try to inform our clients, like you don't ever want to go dark. Yeah, so I like that one. I want to know, so this is just a general question. It doesn't have to be about those campaigns or products, but what was the biggest lesson from marketing through all the chaos of your career that you've done? And how has it changed how you plan and how you act as a marketing leader today?
I would say maybe because we're talking a lot about like measurement and indicators, but I would say leading indicators are the ones that predict the future, and the lagging indicators are the ones that just describe it. And what I mean by that is, more often than not, as marketers, we're usually looking at shares to kind of like tell us if we're in the right track or not. But by the time you kind of have that, it's a little bit too late. It's just describing what has happened. So actually sometimes play this game with other marketers or even with myself, where before the share report comes out, you should have an indication if it's up or down, because you shouldn't be waiting for it as if it's this oracle that tells you how the whole thing has happened. So for me, that is being attuned to the leading indicators, because sometimes it's not, the focus might not be on that, because usually like a certain metrics we are rewarded on are really on the shares and the sales. And so, but that actually is really important, because it allows you to still adjust things in real time.
So pro tip for those listening, top leading indicators that you always check.
I would say exactly what I said earlier: memory / ad recall, as well as brand linkage. So
brand linkage, explain that for those that may not understand.
As long as so if you communicate a benefit in whatever touch point, it doesn't really have to be TV, whatever touch point that you have, you communicate a benefit and people remember that and attribute it to your brand, I would say like most of the work is done. The rest would come much easily after that.
And is most of this tracking for your brand health and all those type of conversations, is that coming through social listening, or you also have some quant-qual research that you're doing? I'm assuming you've got quite a big access to data on your end.
Yes. There's really like a big emphasis on brand health trackers through third parties that really... It's really a mix of quanti and quali. So there's a quanti side that you get very regularly, and as marketers, I really think we should always be on the ground and talking to the consumers all the time. So that's where the quali part comes in.
Yeah, so one of the hacks that I always teach my team, if we don't have the budget to have the third parties do it, and also my producer tells me all the time as well, is talking to the customer. The other hack I also used to do at UPS was talking to the call center, because they get a lot of it come in. Like I used to manage the customer experience team. So I'd have the NPS data, you could read the verbatims, but actually listening into some of the calls, you'd hear so much more. And then talking to the customers. It's not always easy, but it's definitely the hack that marketers can do if they don't have the third-party providers feeding all that information in. I'd say the next thing, like you keep saying, is that social listening, because at least it keeps you on the pulse. What I want to know now is, if you could ban or fix one ROI metric industry-wide for all of us, what would it be and why are you still using it?
Oh gosh, that's a very interesting question.
So one you ban, one you fix.
Oh gosh, that's a hard question. I mean, data is data. The more you have, it's great. But I don't necessarily know if this is maybe the way I'd frame it is anything any metric that is related to just virality. Let's just say celebrating likes and just purely that.
Yep.
To me, it's good to know. It's good to kind of acknowledge, but to me, it's not really meaningful. What I mean by that is, if you're chasing just after virality, number of clicks, and just basic views without understanding if they fully got the message, etc., you're just funding someone's 5 seconds of fame, and it's really not going to move the needle if there's no clear business linkage or business outcome that comes with it. So I would say anything that has to do with that, celebrating, oh, we went viral.
Yeah. I mean, I would totally agree with that. We look at synergies across channels, right? So just because you get likes, I mean, again, it comes back down to the objective. Was it awareness? Was it engagement? Was it to drive people? And, you've done a lot in TV, and we see like TV often drives search results or other things. So it's the synergies of having TV, out of home, social, paid ads, they all connect and all help each other. The same with we can see that, sometimes in our data, 6-second bumper TV spots might do really well, but we know if you put a 30-second in front of it for 2 weeks, it does even better. So it's all that sort of variation that, like you said, if you take it in silo and just celebrate a silo individual channel or campaign, it doesn't really give you the full picture back to the commercial side of things that we're always talking about, which I love.
There's I mean, obviously, like, I don't want to mention specific brands, but like there's a lot of campaigns that go viral, but it never really helped the brand actually gain share in the market. So I think that's why I keep going back to like, there's really seeking virality just for the sake of that. Virality isn't really, it will trend on socials, sure, but it's probably not going to move the needle.
And before we wrap up and have just a couple of fun questions to finish with, is there anything else that you'd like to share from your past experience that, based on our conversation today, you think would be a really good takeaway for our viewers?
Well, we talked a lot about brand building, storytelling, but to me, I think one of the things is, at the end of the day, behind all these brands are like brand builders who are actually consumers as well. So I think building like a great set of people who really love the brand and who are like strong in their capabilities as marketers, I think that's really at the heart of it all, right? And I think we always say, like there's a lot of data, there's a lot of measurement. At the end of it, that happens in the industry. But I think at the end of the day, if we can reframe these measurements as like growth accelerators versus just as a like a tool, a compliance tool, it will inspire more marketers to do more assets that are insight rich and more performance driven. So I think it's a balance. I think marketing is always a balance of heart and head. It's really an art and a science. More often than not, a lot of the things that work really well has sometimes it's purely gut at some point, right? Like, and you need to develop that muscle. So, and that muscle can only be developed if you're also investing in the team and the people who really care about the brand.
Yeah, and I think you've flipped the narrative quite well on that. It really is about the commercial growth that you're looking at. So if you have that as your core objective, everything you do will build to that, rather than I just want virality or something like that. So I think that's really great. And
maybe just to add a little bit, it's just also celebrating the kind of velocity of learning, right? Like when you celebrate like testing, learning, adapting versus just the end result, it actually can be more inspiring for marketers to iterate and kind of like discover new things. And you never know where that leads.
Exactly. We like to experiment, test and learn. Great. All right. 3 rapid fire questions to finish. What's your worst marketing buzzword or acronym? What do you hate?
Low-hanging fruit. Low-hanging fruit because, and I want to explain this one because it makes opportunities sound effortless, but really even the easiest wins that you get, it takes thought, it takes resources, it takes executional rigor, and so nothing that is truly leading to lasting growth is ever hanging that low. So
spoken like a true marketer. I like that one. Very similar, but not a word. What's your biggest marketing ick?
Oh, I think it's what I said earlier. Like campaigns that actually just run for virality.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know. Yeah. Definitely commercial mindset there. I love that. Last one. What's your favorite marketing metric?
Brand linkage. Because again, as I've said earlier, if people remember what you're trying to say and they attribute it to the brand, sales, loyalty, growth, it comes more naturally. I really do think that is the link between the creative parts of things and the commercial impact of things.
Awesome. Well, Mariel, thank you so much for taking us behind the curtain of some of the world's most loved brands, even though they are soap. It's been amazing. Your experience shows that growth isn't just about great ideas. It's about discipline of measurement, optimization, and knowing when to trust the data versus your instincts. And I think you showed that really well. And it's been a masterclass in balancing the art and science. So thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Nikki. I enjoyed my time.